Squal Tanoya, Hockton Squalwin Quinn, Squatch Nomiap, Nil Tat Mayok, Ya Musquia Miskohomish, Islewatath, Bowinn Ma, Queensna, Chinkaman Tomiyap. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to be with all of you here today, live from the territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. My name is Bowinn Ma, Minister of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, thanking you all for your kind attention this afternoon. I am joined today by Minister Bruce Ralston, Minister of Forests, Minister Nathan Cullen, Minister of Water, Lands, and Resource Stewardship, Neil McLaughlin, Lead Forecaster with the BC Wildfire Service, Jonathan Boyd, Hydrologist with the BC River Forecast Centre, and Alyssa Charbonneau, Meteorologist with Environment and Climate Change Canada. Today, we will be sharing details of modelling of the seasonal risks of wildfires, drought, and flooding across the province, and the actions that we are taking to prepare. It seems like it was just yesterday when tens of thousands of people were evacuated from their communities due to wildfire. Many people lost their homes, their properties, their lives and livelihoods have been impacted. It is hard to imagine the emotional toll that so many went through and continue to go through as they work to rebuild their lives. The climate crisis is here, and we are feeling the impacts of climate change. It is no secret that we did not accumulate the snowpack that we were hoping for in many parts of the province. And while we all hope to get more rain in the months ahead, we are taking action now to prepare for what could be a very challenging season. In fact, we are taking action earlier than ever, and preparations for this year's wildfire and drought seasons are already well underway. We are taking an all-of-government approach and have been working with local governments, First Nations, first responders, and people to create a strong plan for the season based on what we learned last year and in the years prior. Across government, we have been working with our partners to better prepare for what we know will be recurring and possibly worsening emergencies, and to improve how we support people who are forced to leave their homes due to floods and fire. We have been and continue to take action now, working with communities to improve how we support people when they are evacuated. This is exactly why Premier David Eby established an expert task force on emergencies. We knew that we wouldn't have time to wait for a report, so the task force is providing recommendations in real time, and we have been taking immediate action to improve how we prepare for and respond to those emergencies, and working to better support frontline responders and people who must evacuate this season. The task force launched in October when we were at the tail end of dealing with active, out-of-control wildfires and still supporting impacting people. Since then, the task force has been working directly with teams from my ministry as well as the Ministry of Forests. This real-time collaboration allows us to build on what we learned through last year's wildfire season to implement actions to prepare us for the 2024 wildfire season. Today, you will hear about some of the actions we've taken to expand our resources, to incorporate advanced technologies, and strengthen support for people who must leave their homes due to an emergency. Minister Ralston will talk more about the actions we've taken with the BC Wildfire Service. As the impacts of the climate crisis intensifies, we learned from past years that we have to be ready to support more people, even faster than before. Emergency support services teams are ready for any evacuations that may come. Funded by the province, these important supports are delivered by local governments and First Nations right within their communities. Emergency support services can help people cover the cost of immediate needs like accommodations, food, and clothing while they are evacuated from their home and in need of support. But in a large-scale evacuation, it can be challenging for communities to rapidly scale up and provide these supports to people in need. We saw that in the central Okanagan last year, when tens of thousands of people had to leave their homes over the course of a single weekend. Overwhelmed by the sheer volume of people who needed support, evacuees faced extended wait times at reception centres. And this is not what we want to see. While the province moved very quickly last year to step in to help, for many evacuees, the damage was done. These are the worst moments of people's lives, and we know that timely access to supports is critical. That's why an expanded team of emergency support specialists within my ministry is ready to be deployed to communities who need that extra support. And a new one-day training program will allow communities to quickly surge up volunteers when they need to do so. This new streamlined training for emergency support services volunteers allows volunteers to get the training they need in just one day instead of 1 week. This will help us build the pool of responders across the province and allow communities to train volunteers quickly when they're needed the most. British Columbians always step up to support their neighbors in their time of need, and I want to say thank you to each and every one of you who have volunteered and who plan to volunteer this year. If you want to sign up to be an emergency support services volunteer, please contact your local government or your First Nation. Since 2017, our government has invested in over 470 emergency support services projects across the province, of which nearly 100 were announced just this past week. These projects are helping communities expand their capacity to provide emergency support services through volunteer recruitment, retention and training, and the purchase of emergency support services equipment. The funds are also helping transition more local emergency support services programs to our digital system, which enables online ESS registration and direct payment to evacuees. We want people to be able to access the supports that they need quickly during an emergency, and that's why we've made it possible for people to create an online profile before an emergency happens. With an online profile, people who have been evacuated may opt to receive financial services via Interact e-transfer. People can create an online profile for emergency support services right now, and I encourage those who may require support during an evacuation to do so at ess.gov.bc.ca. So that's ess.gov.bc.ca. Although fires and drought are top of mind given the forecasts we'll be sharing today, conditions are different in different parts of the province. And I want to reassure people that we continue to monitor spring freshet conditions closely and are ensuring that the right resources are in place in the event of localized flooding. Ministers Cullen and Ralston will have more to say on drought and wildfire preparations and the importance of conserving water now for the season ahead. Being prepared for an emergency is a team effort, and there are steps that people and families can take now to prepare themselves and their households. That starts with having a plan. We all have busy lives, but nothing is more important than you and your family's safety. So set aside some time in the next couple of weeks to meet as a family and discuss your evacuation plan. And yes, I realize that this is earlier than you might typically do this, but that's because this upcoming season has the potential to be a tough one. Build your grab-and-go kit. Ensure you have insurance and review your home insurance policy to understand how to access coverage if you are evacuated and in need of accommodation. Include in your planning where you will stay if you are evacuated. Family and friends is a great option when accommodation can be in short supply. Preparedbc.ca is an excellent resource to help you get started in your emergency planning. There is no question that last year's wildfire season was difficult. We're taking action on the lessons we learned to strengthen our support for people, communities, and frontline responders. Our commitment to you is that no matter what lies ahead, we're going to do everything we can to keep you and your community safe and to make sure that the supports are there for you if the worst happens. In the face of adversity, British Columbians have shown time and time again that we will come together and we will come out stronger. So let's work together to be prepared. Thank you. I'll now turn it over to Minister Ralston. Lots of papers.
Great. Thanks very much, Minister Ma. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bruce Ralston, Minister of Forests. Great to be here on the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. It was a beautiful weekend here on the coast, and we're already seeing signs of spring. I think many of us had the opportunity to enjoy that. Although it is great to see folks out Taking in the great weather, it's also time to turn our focus to what lies ahead. As you'll hear from our experts with the BC Wildfire Service, drought continues to affect many parts of the province. Wildfire risk is higher than usual for this time of year, spring. BC Wildfire Service is preparing to fight spring fires. In fact, they already have fought several, and they're also preparing for what could be a very challenging season. At this time of year, most new wildfires are started by human activity. So it's incredibly important that when folks are out, that they be extra cautious, enjoying BC's beautiful land and forests, and with any spring cleanup or burning where it's permitted. With current and future conditions in mind, I should note that as of noon on Thursday, March 28th, Category 2 and Category 3 open fires will be prohibited in the Caribou Fire Centre region. This region extends from Loon Lake near Clinton in the south. I know there's a lot of Loon Lakes, but this is the one near Clinton, to the Cottonwood River near Quesnel in the north, from the Tweedsmuir Provincial Park in the west, and Wells Gray Provincial Park in the east. Again, I would encourage everyone to always check for open fire prohibitions and restrictions before doing anything that could potentially cause a wildfire. After last summer's record-breaking wildfire season, our government has been taking action so that we are prepared to meet this wildfire season head-on. While the season will ultimately be shaped by how much rain BC receives this spring and into June, it's clear that it's likely to be a challenging wildfire season this year as we continue to see the impacts of climate change. People want to know that we are speeding up our work to prepare and keep people safe, and we have done just that. We are taking action earlier than ever to boost our ability to fight wildfires in 4 key areas: securing more equipment and aircraft, deploying new technologies and innovation, stepping up prevention work, and emphasizing hiring local people where possible. We expanded the BC Wildfire Service into a year-round operation, and permanent full-time staff have increased over 50% since 2022, with more to come. We know the value of our wildfire team. In 2023, our talented BC Wildfire Service staff helped ensure 80% of fires were contained at 5 hectares or less. To support our dedicated firefighters in their work, we're upgrading our existing aviation fleet to include additional plane and helicopter leasing agreements, and securing more pumps, mass water delivery systems, camp infrastructure, structure protection, and a new equipment depot in Prince George that will improve the flow of resources, tools, and assets across British Columbia. Alongside new equipment, the BC Wildfire Service is also deploying new technologies to help tackle fires more efficiently and effectively. As announced this morning, we are expanding the use of wildfire predictive technologies to better pinpoint where wildfires will move and how they will grow. During a wildfire, this technology will help the BC Wildfire Service make critical decisions faster. BC Wildfire Service fights fires 24/7 and will continue to trial new technology that can enhance our already significant nighttime operations, adding to the BC Wildfire Service existing ability to detect and map wildfire activity, all while supporting ground crews. All this is in support of BC Wildfire Service's transition to year-round rather than seasonal operations. Transitioning to year-round operations has also allowed the BC Wildfire Service to boost prevention work heading into the 2024 wildfire season. Thousands of hectares near communities are being treated by the province and our partners to help prevent fires. We are increasing the use of prescribed and cultural burning. There are currently 61 cultural and prescribed burn projects planned for 2024, building on the 23 projects completed in 2023. We will continue to take action to keep people safe as we deal with the impacts of climate change and as wildfires become more intense, not only here across Canada, but around the globe. We have one of the most effective and advanced wildfire management models in the world, and it's people that make it possible. By expanding our hiring window for firefighters, we have seen tremendous interest from people all around the province, and for that, I am grateful. So far, we have more than double the number of applicants compared to last year. I encourage anyone who is interested to apply. We are taking action on all fronts to prepare for whatever this wildfire season brings. People want to know that we're doing everything possible to prepare, from hiring, equipment, and aircraft to new technologies and prevention. We're doing just that. I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Nathan Cullen. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nathan Cullen, Minister of Water, Lands and Resource Stewardship. I'm also the MLA for Stikine in the northwest of our province. Pleasure to be here today from the territory of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Many communities experienced severe drought conditions last summer. For some communities in BC, prolonged drought was something entirely new. For others, it was a summer and fall that have become all too familiar. We are facing a reality that extreme weather events are becoming more regular and more challenging year over year. Droughts threaten the water we need to drink, the water we need to grow our food, and keep our fish, salmon, and animals and the environment healthy. Continued warm and dry conditions this winter and a low snowpack, combined with year-over-year impacts of extreme weather, means drought could become a serious issue again this year and in the years to come. Yet as serious as this challenge is, so too must be our collective effort to face it. Last week, we got the latest information from the River Forecast Centre, and the message is simple. The average provincial snowpack for March 1st was 66% of normal, and for many communities, snowpack is the main source of accessible drinking water. While we hope for more rain and snow in the coming months, we must be ready for what may lie ahead. That is why we are taking strong and early action to help people prepare for drought, both this year and in the years to come. We learned a great deal from 2023, as well as from other jurisdictions, provinces and states, and we have a strong plan for this year that is well underway. The impact of drought affects everyone, and the power and the responsibility to face drought is also shared. All levels of government, First Nations, local, provincial, and federal, the private sector, neighbours down to individual British Columbians. Everyone can help save water. Small changes by many people can make a big difference when we do them together. Work is underway with communities to prepare for drought, and in the weeks ahead, I'll be reaching out directly to local leaders to discuss what more we can do together. We also know that farmers and ranchers are among those who face the toughest challenges from drought. That's why we're hosting over 30 community workshops with our colleagues at Agriculture throughout the province to help them prepare for drought. And earlier today, the Premier and Minister Alexis announced the details of a key action, $83 million to expand the agriculture water infrastructure program, working in partnership with farmers and ranchers across British Columbia. Budget 2024 also supports critical water infrastructure, 21 new pilot programs for water metering in local communities, a new Cowichan Lake weir to improve water storage, improvements to storage and capacity water management at St. Mary Lake on Salt Spring Island. We're also working with First Nations and with Fisheries and Oceans Canada to protect salmon and other at-risk species that are in drought-prone areas. Targeted, temporary water restrictions may be needed again, but they are a last resort if voluntary efforts aren't enough to restore water flows and protect vulnerable fish and habitat from long-lasting harm that could take generations to recover. We're doing everything we can to avoid these kinds of restrictions, or at least delay the need for them as long as possible. This all builds on actions already underway across the province, including BC Hydro's work to prepare our power system for the season, community emergency preparedness grants that Minister Ma talked about, projects to keep salmon and fish populations strong, and a new watershed security strategy that has spent $57 million with another $100 million to be dispersed. Preparing for drought now will help us make and plan for better future in our communities and make us more resilient. These are just some of the many strong and early actions we're taking to keep people and communities safe from drought by making sure we're prepared this year and the years ahead. While we don't know for sure what this spring, summer, and fall will look like in terms of rain and drought, I want people to know that we have a plan. We are working in partnership, and we're being prepared for each of the seasons, and that we'll get through this together. Thank you very much. I'll turn it back to Minister Ma.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cullen. I believe our next presentation is from Alyssa Charbonneau, a meteorologist with the Environment and Climate Change Canada.
Thank you very much. Can I get confirmation from the room that you're able to see my screen?
Well, we can. Hopefully the cameras can too.
Excellent. Hi, my name is Alyssa Charbonneau, and I am very grateful today to be speaking to you from the traditional unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Before I begin my briefing on the upcoming weather, I would just like to say that this is going to be provided in English, but questions are welcome at the end on either official language, and that the response will be provided in the language of the question. L'exposé météorologique suivant sera fourni en anglais, mais vos questions sont bienvenues en l'une ou l'autre des langues officielles, et les réponses seront fournies dans la langue de la question. So as we know, the impacts of future weather are very much tied to the antecedent or previous weather conditions that we have seen. Because of this, we'll begin by looking back to last summer to review how our fall and winter have played out. So here we are looking at images showing how much warmer or cooler monthly temperatures have been compared to our seasonal normal. The darker the color, red for above normal, blue for below normal, the more extreme the departure from seasonal mean. And we can quickly see that from late summer through December, most of BC experienced above normal temperatures. January and February appear closer to seasonal conditions. However, this is only because January experienced both extremely warm and extremely cold conditions, and they somewhat canceled each other out. Overall, our fall and winter has been warmer than normal for most of British Columbia. Looking now at precipitation, this image shows total precipitation over the same period, from August 2023 through February 2024, as a percentage of normal precipitation. And the widespread areas of brown highlight a widespread precipitation deficit across much of British Columbia. And this is particularly pronounced through the northeast and central parts of the province. If we look back even further, we can see that this pattern is not new. So this image is showing monthly precipitation anomalies. That's how each month's precipitation compares to normal, going back 4 years at Fort St. James, which is located northwest of Prince George. The months that are shaded in yellow and brown that fall below the solid black line indicate when monthly precipitation was below the long-term mean. And as we can see from this image, drier than normal conditions have been persistent for several years. As we look ahead, spring is our transition season, and we are moving into what is typically the wet season for the interior of British Columbia, with the wettest months normally seen in June, July, as indicated here by the green columns, shown in a graph of the climate normals for Fort St. John. Now, this season can be dominated by cold lows or areas of cool air aloft, and they can lead to heavy downpours and thunderstorms. It's really a fine balance between getting enough rain, but not too much. It's also a season when we can see periods of warm and dry weather. And so ECCC will also be watching for prolonged heat events, especially when followed by heavy rain, which could lead to flooding, or when followed by lightning, which could lead to wildfires. For the coast, spring marks the transition into a dry season, with the driest months typically coming in July and August. However, here too, it's still possible to see storm systems that bring heavy rain, winds, and even thunderstorms during the spring. We'll again be watching for those events that could lead to impacts such as flooding or wildfires. So one phenomenon that we've heard a lot about this winter is El Nino. Now, El Nino is forecast to fade this spring, with neutral conditions expected to transition to La Nina conditions by late summer. Here in British Columbia, both El Nino and La Nina play a role in our winter and early spring weather. They do not typically affect our summer or fall weather. Because of this, we don't expect La Nina, even if it does develop by late this summer, to impact us until perhaps next December or later. Our seasonal forecasts looking forward indicate that warmer conditions are likely to continue both in the near term from mid-March to mid-April and in the longer range from April through June. Now, one caution when we're looking at these forecasts averaging over multiple months is that they will average out the day-to-day weather and any extreme conditions, which is, of course, what is most important for our impacts. We will only know about these individual weather events in the days leading up to them, and it will be very important to monitor our forecasts through the season. Looking now at precipitation, we can see that the early spring forecast on the left-hand side image shows a probability of drier than normal conditions for much of British Columbia through mid-March to mid-April. On the right-hand side image, we are looking at the April, May, June period. Of note, most of the map is blank, indicating that our forecast has no discernible trend for precipitation, either above, below, or near normal, and therefore no useful information for us. One small exception is the slight probability of above normal temperatures that we see in the southeast of the province. Drought and wildfire conditions will be highly dependent on the actual weather patterns and the precipitation that we see through the spring and summer, below or near normal, and therefore no useful information for us. One small exception is the slight probability of above normal temperatures that we see in the southeast of the province. Drought and wildfire conditions will be highly dependent on the actual weather patterns and the precipitation that we see through the spring and summer. And again, we will only know about these individual weather events in the days leading up to them. And it will be important to monitor our forecasts through the season. Thank you, and I will now hand it over to Jonathan Boyd with the River Forecast Center.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. Yeah, my name's Jonathan Boyd. I'm a hydrologist with the River Forecast Center. I'm calling from Victoria, the traditional land of the Lekwungen people, known today as the Esquimalt and Songhees nations. So following up on Alyssa's summary of drier and warmer conditions through the fall and winter, it has resulted in a lower snowpack than normal across BC. And as of March 1st, the provincial average of all stations was 66% of normal, which is a tie for the second lowest over the past 50 years with the year 2001. For March 1st was actually 1977 at 53% of normal. And with that, the Fraser River at Hope is also low at 70% of normal. And that just indicates that there's a lower than normal risk of flooding for the lower Fraser Valley. The region in the province that is above normal is the Northwest at 114% of normal. And the South Thompson boundary and some localized areas in the South Interior are close to normal. So still below normal, but getting near towards normal. On to the next slide, please. So although the provincial average is the second lowest this year as of March 1st, it doesn't necessarily mean that every region is at their second lowest. And plotted here are just 4 of the approximately 100 automated snow weather stations across the province. These 4 particular stations have relatively long periods of record, which are shown in the green, blue, and gray percentile bands, with a white line in the center representing the median. And the current year's data is plotted as the black line, last year in yellow, and an additional red line shows an historically low year from the past. So just starting in the upper left, the Chilliwack River Station in the lower Fraser, this year's snow has really rebounded since the rapid melt that occurred from the atmospheric river events in late January. Through February, it was tracking alongside the lowest year recorded, which was 2015, but is now fairly healthy from recent snowfalls in late February and early March. On the upper right is the Mission Creek Station in the Okanagan, and the bottom left is the East Creek Snow Station in the West Kootenay. Snowpack has been seasonably low through the winter in both of these locations, but not necessarily near the record low. And recent snowfall has bumped these sites up to just below normal for this time of year. And noting here with the plots that we typically can continue to add snow up at the higher elevation mountain sites for another 4 to 6 weeks, so potentially even leading into the start of May. The Mission Creek site in the upper right plots 1977. That was that record low year for March 1st. And it shows that it eventually rebounded in March and wasn't necessarily the lowest by the end of the season. And the East Creek site in the bottom left shows 1993 as an example of a very low year. In the bottom right is the Upper Fraser East site, Revolution Creek. It is showing very low conditions and near record lows plotted alongside in red 2001. Over to the next slide, please. So with recent bumps in the localized snowpack, it is a reminder that before the impacts of a potential continuation of drought conditions are felt, we have to get through the spring snowmelt related flood season. And that's commonly referred to as freshet. So mountain snowpack can continue to accumulate into April and potentially even May. In some years, we will have warmer springs, specifically April, and we'll see some significant snowmelt occurring there. Typically, that just leads to issues at smaller and lower elevation watersheds, potentially experiencing flood hazards. But usually the time period for greatest flood hazard is May and June. And that also coincides with the interior wet season, which, as Alyssa pointed out, is unpredictable. It is just the wet period of time for the interior is the spring. And in particular, what can develop in around June and July are cold low events, and sometimes they're referred to as wraparound low pressure systems. These are very strong events that are independent of the snowpack, where heavy rain will be isolated and targeted into one area and can cause potentially extreme flooding. And examples of that in the last 10 years is Calgary in 2013, Dawson Creek in 2016, or the Chilcotin in 2019. And to slide 4. So just to summarize, there is a decreased flood hazard this season due to a lower snowpack, but the season isn't over yet. And with El Nino, there is an increased likelihood of earlier snowmelt than normal, but it's not necessarily guaranteed. The weather conditions will be the real driving force for potential spring flooding, whether that's extreme heat or very heavy rainfall, and that's irrespective of it being a below normal snowpack. And the River Forecast Center will continue to operate as we do, and when we get into the busy snowmelt season, there will be daily forecasting from our hydrological models and issuing of advisories and warnings as needed. On to the next slide. For the seasonal drought outlook, there are concerns. A significant drought occurred last year throughout the entire province, and drought conditions did linger into the winter for much of the interior and especially the north. So with lower snowpack conditions, there is a decreased runoff that is expected for rivers and into lakes throughout the province. But the real critical factor in what happens this year with drought is what the spring weather and spring and summer weather will do. And that just truly can't be predicted past about 10 to 14 days. And just as an example to close things up, the last time our April 1st snowpack was below normal was in 2019. And that also coincided with the last time that we had an El Nino event. It was very hot in May. It was an extremely rapid melt. Actually, it was the hottest May on record until May of last year, 2023. June was dry. The province was preparing for the extreme drought in 2019. And then July and August ended up being very cold, very wet. It was almost like a summer that never was. And we were dealing more with flooding than we were with drought or wildfire. So just to summarize, there is no guarantee for drought to impact like we did last year, but it certainly is possible, and it could be worse if we get similar climatic conditions as last year with this very low snowpack. Now I'll pass it over to Neil McLaughlin with the BC Wildfire Service.
Thank you, Jonathan. Neil McLaughlin, I'm the Superintendent of Predictive Services. I work out of our Kamloops headquarters, joining you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Kamloops Secwepemc peoples. Similar to the previous presenters, we're going to have a look back at 2023. It provides important context when we think about the season ahead. The map I'm showing you on this slide is our drought code. And, there's a lot of discussion of drought in the media and at large. One distinction with respect to the values you're looking at on this map is this is tracking the moisture available in fuels. So the deep organic layers of soil and large deadened down woody debris on the forest floor. So unlike, maybe our more traditional way of thinking of drought in terms of water bodies and watersheds. And so when we think of fuels and low moisture content, that means they're more available to burn by wildfire. And so on this map, the higher values correspond with low moisture. Those colors of orange and red are high to extreme values, which we ended with in the fall of 2023. In fact, most areas of the province last year, prior to freezing, were carrying very high drought code values into the winter months. But we did have some fall precipitation that helped to recover those drought values prior to the soils freezing. And so specifically looking for the blue areas on the map, including our coastal fire center, portions of the Northwest Fire Center around Prince Rupert and along the Alaska Panhandle, and then also northern portions of our Southeast Fire Center from Revelstoke up to Robson Valley. So we like blue on the map. We'd like to see a lot more blue on the map, but it's nice to at least have a couple of locations that have seen some drought code recovery last fall. For the remainder of the southern interior, central interior, up into the northeast, we do expect that those high drought values we saw last fall will carry forward into the spring. And to alleviate those drought values, we're going to have to see continuous and widespread rain once the snow melts and the soil thaws. And we'll speak about that a little bit later in the presentation. One other factor when we think about drought is that this hasn't, Alyssa mentioned it earlier, this didn't just start last year. This is years in the making. And the live vegetation, the forest vegetation is experiencing that drought. And we may start to see drought stress reflected in the vegetation where there could be die-off, additional dead needles and leaves on the forest floor, or live vegetation that just can't maintain high levels of fuel moisture. And so again, making the forest more combustible, more available to burn. We can go to the next slide, please. So a similar map to what Jonathan shared earlier, showing the low snow basin index across the province. But what I wanted to speak to you about on this slide is just, how snow can play a role in recovery of drought values going into the next season. And so, although we've seen some snow recently in certain regions of the province, the contribution of snow reducing fire danger this spring is going to be minimal. And that's for several reasons. One reason is that up to 60 to 70% of snow sublimates. And so that's where, ice or snow goes directly into water vapor in the atmosphere. It doesn't actually melt and penetrate the soils. Two, there's fairly low water equivalent. So when you do melt a large volume of snow, it doesn't actually equate to that much water. And then if it melts quickly, a lot of that can run off. And so instead of absorbing into the soils and woody debris, it makes its way into the creeks and rivers and runs off. So as Jonathan mentioned, as of March 1st, the snowpack is quite low in most regions. And that low snowpack is going to further limit what kind of fuel moisture recharge we see going into the spring season. But perhaps one of the greatest benefits of a healthy snowpack is just delaying the onset of the spring fire season by sheltering the forest floor from drying. And so unfortunately, we're not going to see that in the spring of 2024 either. And so like last year where we saw snow melt 3 to 4 weeks earlier than normal, we're probably going to see similar conditions in many regions of the province this year. And we're likely already seeing valley bottoms and mid slopes exposed to drying throughout the province. And so more days of drying just means you can quickly escalate fire danger. Where we have shallow snowpacks at upper elevations, that will favor early exposure and drying of alpine vegetation. So we can probably anticipate an earlier start to lightning-caused fires as well. So where we typically see lightning is in the months of July and August, we may start to see lightning as early as June. And then the one last point I want to make around snow, with the early departure of snow, and an early start to spring, that also corresponds with an early start to our prescribed burning activities. And so prescribed burning is an important early fire season activity. It's intended to remove hazardous fuels and promote healthy forest ecosystems in our changing climate. And so, you may start to see locally some prescribed burns occurring and some that have already occurred. So just be aware of that and its intentions there. It's a very important spring activity for BC Wildfire Service. If we can go to the next slide, please. I'd like to talk a little bit about holdover fires. Holdover fires are a wildfire from the previous season that remains active through the winter, typically as a ground fire that's smoldering underneath the forest floor. Holdover fires are not unusual. They typically occur in areas where you have deep organic soil layers and heavy surface fuel beds, like in our northern reaches of the province. And drought conditions from the last fall that I showed earlier, those certainly contribute and play a role in holdover fires. And we're going to see in the next slide that we do have many holdover fires across the Northeast. But on this slide, we're looking at some satellite detections from around Christmas time and picking up satellite detections of fire heat between the Donnie Creek wildfire and the Kluwa Lakes wildfire from last year. And so this is even rare, like to see a hot spot showing up with a satellite detection in the middle of winter. So certainly it's a reflection of the conditions we saw last year throughout the Northeast. We'll go to the next slide, please. So looking at our current wildfire situation, on the right is a map of mostly our holdover fires from last year. There's 90 active holdover fires, predominantly across the Northeast, as can be seen on the map. We've also had 8 new wildfire starts since January 1. BC is going to continue to monitor all of the holdover fires you see on this map. But I wanted to talk about a couple of factors. A lot of the holdover fires that we're going to see this spring are going to be corresponding with unburned vegetation that falls within the perimeters of last year's fires. As those areas ignite or start to burn, they pose minimal risk in terms of spreading beyond of last year's fire boundaries. What BC Wildfire Service is most concerned about is holdover fires that are occurring along the edges of last year's fire perimeters. Those holdover fires could definitely ignite in unburnt fuels and spread beyond the boundaries of last year. So our focus will be early detection and early suppression of those holdover fires along the edges of previous perimeters. Of the active fires we have, all of them are in either a being held or under control status. And just to remind you, being held is a wildfire that is not likely to spread beyond predetermined boundaries under current conditions. And an under control wildfire is a fire that's not spreading any further due to the suppression efforts that have been implemented. So really, if we don't see prolonged rains, there certainly is potential for ignition of some of these holdover fires, but we'll certainly monitor the ones that pose a risk of spreading beyond last year's boundaries. A reminder on this slide is, anyone involved in conducting early season burning to remove hazardous fuels should be planning to take additional efforts to ensure fires are completely out. These conditions, this reflection of the extreme drought we saw last year is going to carry forward. We're going to see deep burning, and with deep burning, it does take additional effort to put those fires out safely. Next slide, please. So what could turn this in a different direction? Typically, early spring months are the wettest months for the BC interior, and that's a good thing. There is potential that we could see conditions improve as we progress through spring. I think we can all expect that spring is going to be busier than normal and an active spring fire season, but the remainder of the season is still yet to be determined. We have seen in the past rain events that would be sufficient to reduce the drought conditions I showed earlier in my presentation. But to give you an idea, we would be looking in the north for a minimum of 40 millimeters of rain over a 2-week period to turn that around. So while it's possible, while we've seen that in our climatology, it's less likely to occur. And so we'll have to wait and see, but that is something that, everyone can watch for as we go through the months of May and June. If we're starting to see some significant rainfall events, that's a really good thing, and it can really set the stage for maybe a different outcome for the longer fire season ahead. So let's go to the next slide, please. So when we think about what is required for a prolonged fire season like we saw last year, there's 3 factors we typically look for. One is drought, and that is here. We've got drought across, many regions of the province. 2 is a low snowpack, and as we've discussed, that's present as well. The 3rd is strong ridging, which brings hot, dry temperatures in the summer months, and the absence of spring rains. And so again, that's yet to be determined. Long-range precipitation forecasts have limited skill, so it's we'll wait and see. But certainly, the long-term outlook could go in 2 different directions depending on the presence or absence of spring rains. I'd like to remind folks, as we think about those different outcomes, we should be preparing for a prolonged fire season, even if it doesn't occur. So, safe use of fire, extra vigilance when working and recreating outdoors is critical to alleviate any early human-caused fires this spring. And as well, BC Wildfire Service appreciates any support the public can provide in reporting wildfires so that our fire crews can respond quickly while those fires are still small. And you can do that by dialing *5555 on a cell phone or using our BC Wildfire Service app. Next slide, please. So in summary, the underlying deep drought conditions will remain as we step into spring 2024. El Nino is currently fading, but there's residual heat in the atmosphere, and we're going to continue to see warmer conditions into the spring, earlier snow melt. One thing I didn't mention earlier that's important, we often talk about warm temperatures, but what is also really a critical factor in the spring is dry air masses. And so when the relative humidity is low, that is a real key ingredient for rapidly drying our fuels and promoting easy ignition. So it may be warm and it may be moist air mass, but if we get those typical dry spring air masses, that could be problematic. Long-range precipitation forecasts, as we've discussed, they have limited skill, and the rainfall that's required to alleviate the drought conditions we have is unlikely, but possible. And given the antecedent conditions, an early start to our spring fire season is expected, along with some increased wildfire activity, and certainly up in the Northeast where we've seen some holdover fires from last year. So a reminder, the majority of our spring fires are human-caused. It's not until about July and August that we start to see a spike in lightning-caused fires. So please take extra caution with outdoor activities this spring. And if we can alleviate those human-caused fires, that will really help reduce the fire load as we start a busy spring fire season. And with that, I'll turn it back to the meeting host. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to our technical staff for their presentations. We will now open up for questions.
Thank you for joining us today. As a reminder for reporters on the phone, please press *1 to enter the queue. That's *1 to ask a question. For media in the room, please line up at the microphone provided. We will take questions from reporters in the room first. Please state your name and outlet. Media will be limited to one question and one.
The potential that some of the prescribed burns last year may have sparked some of the larger fires. If you could just tell us why this change in strategy, almost a tripling this year, that would be helpful.
Sure. Before I turn it over to the ministers, can I get a clarification? Which hazard are you referring to when you're asking about preparations? General preparations, and we did talk about drought as well as wildfire, flooding.
It's wildfire that I'm most
Wildfire in
concerned with. Yeah.
particular? Then let's turn it over to Minister Ralston.
Thanks very much. Just to deal with the issue of cultural burns and the legislation was changed in the previous session to give more opportunity for those kind of burns to take place. Any of those kind of prescribed burns or cultural burns require advanced planning, a very detailed advanced planning, and they are important for managing what they call fuel load, that is within areas, particularly around communities where the fire risk and the threat to the community is the highest, to burn away debris and on the forest floor, and that gives a greater protection to the community. Cultural burn is something that's been practiced by Indigenous people for millennia. We've given the legislative approval or, I guess, jurisdiction to engage in those kind of cultural burns as well. Similarly, they work with BC Wildfire Service to develop and build the burn and make sure that it takes place in an absolutely safe way.
Do you have a follow-up?
Oh, did Neil want to weigh in on that as well?
I certainly could. My Director of Operations is on the line as well. So I'll just check in with Cliff Chapman if he wanted to take that question.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks for having me on today. Specifically, just want to follow up on the minister's comments around planned ignitions versus cultural and prescribed fire. And so to the reporter's question, and thank you very much for the question, a planned ignition is a tactic that we use during response operations. So when we're actively fighting a fire, we may use planned ignitions to try to burn out the fuel between a control line and the active fire, which is out of control. Cultural and prescribed fire is a prevention mechanism in which we apply fire, or we work with Indigenous communities, local governments, local fire departments to apply fire on the landscape in the interest of resiliency and reducing the risk for communities and other values at risk, as well as using it for traditional practices, traditional cultural practices, which are obviously unique to the First Nation communities who are conducting the cultural burns. So there is a difference between planned ignitions and cultural and prescribed fire. The reason why our numbers have tripled this spring is because the use of cultural and prescribed fire to reduce the risk on the land base is the most practical in many areas of BC to be able to apply risk reduction treatments at scale. And so that's why you're seeing an increase in the use of cultural and prescribed fire as we head into 2024, is we are trying to go out and reduce some of those fine fuels out in and around and adjacent to communities, working in partnership with those communities to conduct those burns in a safe and planned.
Do you have a follow-up?
I do have a follow-up now. It's for Minister Ma. Last year, we saw conflict in a few communities. I'm just thinking about the shoe swap in particular, where people wanted to participate in trying to help save their homes. They were in a situation where they felt that not enough was being done to do that. So I just want to know, in the many months that we've had since the end of the last fire season, what efforts have there been to try to kind of work with communities to try to ease those tensions? What can you tell us about the work that's being done to try to work more cooperatively with local residents?
Sure. I'll start with a response, and I'll see if Minister Ralston would like to add, and anyone else on the line as well. You know, what we saw in 2023 wildfire season were many communities impacted, and a significant desire from community members to be a part of the solution, to be a part of protecting their communities. And while through the Ministry of Forests and the work of the BC Wildfire Service, those kinds of collaborative opportunities with partners, including community members, industry sectors, and other local responders does exist, there was clearly an opportunity for us to be better at that and to demonstrate that that opportunity exists within communities. We don't want conflict during an emergency. During an emergency, particularly one against a natural disaster that threatens the lives and livelihoods of people across the province, is the least desirable time to have conflicts between people within our communities, between levels of government. That's why it's so incredibly important for us to pull together those kinds of conversations that we have with our emergency response partners, local governments, First Nations, emergency responders, and communities are happening right now, or they've occurred already right through the last several months. I will also say the Premier's expert task force on emergencies has done a fantastic job of traveling the province, of listening to different communities and stakeholders about their experiences, to learn from them, and we are actively working right now to implement as many of those recommendations as possible. Mr. Ralston, did you want to add?
There are very good examples of that kind of regional cooperation in the area of Utsa Lake and Francois Lake near Burns Lake. There's a society called the Chinook Emergency Response Society. It arose as a result of the community reaction to a fire in 2018, and they have now formed a society. They work with the BC Wildfire Service. They receive training. They've divided their region up into neighborhood pods and assigned responsibility to individuals within the mini geographic area. So that's the sort of cooperation with communities that we want to encourage, and there is a program internally to the BC Wildfire Service that is helping groups to work with the BC Wildfire Service. Fighting wildfire is dangerous, so there's a requirement that and a necessity that there be coordination. But certainly we want to work with communities to fight wildfire. Obviously, individuals and communities have a very personal stake in the outcome of a fire and how it might affect their property, their house, or their business. And so, but I think we've learned from last season, and we hope that we can achieve great outcomes in response to fighting fires in locally this summer.
Any more questions in the room?
I got one. Minister Ma, just a friend of mine's house burned down last year, and he's gone through the insurance process. It happened in the Shuswap region. He says people are really struggling to get insurance, and insurance fees have gone up. What advice would you have for people in those situations?
Yeah, so my ministry has actually had several conversations with the Insurance Bureau of Canada to get advice on and I guess a status update on the insurance situation in British Columbia. They continue to assure us that wildfire insurance for residents continues to be widely available across the province. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody in every part of the province can afford it. And so those are really important aspects of access to wildfire insurance that are important for my ministry to know about. We have been seeking out information to help us understand the wildfire insurance situation across the province. And it is incredibly important for us to stay on top of this. I will also say that for those homeowners who are debating whether or not it is worthwhile to get insurance, it absolutely is. Please do get your wildfire insurance. Please do purchase that insurance. It is available to you. But again, I do understand that for some people, accessibility through affordability is an issue, and that's something that we're watching for.
So that's a follow-up question. So are you saying that the wildfire insurance is available for everybody, but just a matter of cost?
So based on our conversations with the Insurance Bureau of Canada, there are no areas in British Columbia that are unable to, where a resident is unable to be insured for wildfire. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean every single insurance company provides it, and it doesn't necessarily mean that that insurance is affordable to that individual. And that is a reality that I recognize may be the case for people, and something that we're looking to grapple with.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah, from City TV and Omni TV. Back again to the shoe swap issue. That was the specific region where there was all the conflict. It really was a big talking point, as we all recall. Can you speak to, has there been specific contact and communication collaboration with folks in that region, and specifically the folks who were the most upset last year? And we remember hearing about people taking equipment from the fire service, or because if you haven't had direct collaboration with those folks, we might just see a repeat this year.
So I'll allow Minister Ralston and the BC Wildfire Service to speak to the discussions and the engagement that occurred, not just since the wildfire season, but actually during that conflict as well. If you'll recall, when we kind of go back to that time in the 2023 wildfire season, BC Wildfire Service actually really opened their doors to conversations with community members within the Shuswap region, and worked with them to provide training to those people who wanted to get trained and participate in the fight. As Minister Ralston has said, wildfire fighting is it is a dangerous occupation, and it must be done in a safe and coordinated way. And so we do want to be able to work with communities and have that coordinated response. It is absolutely the case, however, that when you have an uncoordinated response within communities, it is not just unsafe to the individuals, it is also unsafe to the other wildfire responders, and it can actually impact the types of tactics that the BC Wildfire Service can take to protect those communities. Through the Ministry of Emergency Management Climate Readiness, our communication with the regional district has been constant right through from the last wildfire season through the winter, and even continues today. And maybe I'll have Minister Ralston, or if Cliff Chapman is on the line, they can speak to some of the engagements and discussions that have taken place. Cliff? Okay, we'll go straight to Cliff on that one.
Thank you, Minister Ma. Thank you for the question. And, I think it is a big part of our evolution as a response agency, this connection and this integration with communities that are impacted. And it's similar to what I just described with cultural and prescribed fire. It is in all four pillars of emergency response or emergency management around wildfires, inclusive of the response phase. I think Minister Ma did a really nice job discussing the safety considerations. And we are working closely with communities to put on really safety-focused training for response, so that when we have fires near and or adjacent to communities, we can use the local fire departments and local municipalities, and First Nation fire departments and local governments to really engage in a safe way, to have those people embedded into the response activities in and around the community, working hand in hand with BC Wildfire Service staff and other contractors to do everything we can to protect those very same communities. So, we continue to evolve in this space. We want to have those conversations with communities when we see active fire in and around and close to. We want to work closely with regional districts and local governments to work together to most effectively manage the fire, as well as keeping people safe and doing everything we can to protect high value, structures, assets, and other infrastructure in the area. So that's been a big push for us this off season. As we head into 2024, we'll start to hear more out of the expert task force in terms of what this structure is going to look like. But it's an exciting move forward, I believe, for us and for locals in the area to support the work to protect their homes.
Any follow-up?
Yeah, my follow-up just would be, has there been any direct contact with these civilians who were most upset last year? Was there an attempt to find out who they are and talk to them and that's what I want to know. It's kind of a yes or no. Any direct contact with folks in Shuswap who last year were really upset, and has that relationship improved with specific folks?
Yeah, Cliff, maybe you can remind folks of the important work that the BC Wildfire Service did directly with community members last year.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. So the answer is yes, and I think Minister Ma did a good job answering that right away. Obviously, not the first few days. There was conflict there. We're not denying that there was conflict. I think it was, in the heat of the emergency. I think we all needed to remember that humans are at the center of that emergency, and so we engaged directly with those individuals once that fire made its aggressive run after the cold front on August 18th. Many of them came to work for us in the period that followed. Some of them maintained working with us until basically that incident was put into being held status. And I believe that the task force also engaged with the Columbia-Shuswap Regional District, who was collecting debriefs of their local citizens that was then fed into the task force to help shape some of the initiatives that are now coming up. So there has been multiple direct contact with individuals in that area. Could I say every one of them? I would not be comfortable saying that, but there has been lots of contact with individuals in that area. And similarly on other fires where there was some challenges that we needed to work through with the local community members.
Thank you, Cliff.
We are going to the media on the phone now. Our first question is from Moira Wetton, CBC. Go ahead, please.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I'm curious, we've heard a lot of scientific debate recently about probabilistic versus deterministic modeling for watershed and flood risk with forestry projects. I'm wondering, how are the extremes that all the ministers spoke about in terms of climate-driven weather extremes, how are they factoring into the wildfire modeling and predictions that BC Wildfire Service is working on this year? Maybe that's a question for Neil.
Yeah, sounds like a pretty technical question. We'll go to the line.
Yeah, hi there, it's Neil. Thanks for the question. Really excited to announce that our BC Wildfire Service is pursuing a number of different fire growth modeling tools to support our business intelligence. We trialed some of these tools last year and are looking to roll them out provincially, and there was a news release about that today. But when it comes to the differentiation between a deterministic versus a probabilistic, where a deterministic gives you kind of like one possibility for what the future might look like, whereas a probabilistic can speak to uncertainty in what you're forecasting. It gives you a range of possibilities, and there's a number of different ways, but we do have that capability now in our toolkit. One of the cautions we have with that in sharing that outwards is, as you can imagine, if you're looking at another natural hazard and you give a range of possibilities, people tend to want to know what's going to happen. And so internally, we'll use that kind of intelligence to kind of explore best case, worst case scenarios and derive our strategies and tactics from that. But certainly there's I would say there's a growing awareness of different ways of modeling, but certainly the literacy in using that information more broadly is maybe in development. And so, really happy and excited to kind of have those tools available to us, and we will be using them this fire season ahead.
Any follow-up?
Thank you. Yes, this is for Minister Ma. We're hearing of summer events, a lot of the quintessential summer events in British Columbia moving their dates, rescheduling, or coming out with contingency and refund policies in the event that wildfires push them out and make it impossible to take place. Can you speak to, I guess, this new reality that you and other ministers on the announcement described, and the new reality of prolonged and compounding drought that we're experiencing?
What we are seeing, especially given the events of recent years, is that climate change is here upon us, and the impacts to communities are impacts that we are already experiencing day to day, week to week, month to month, and year to year. It used to be the case that we would talk about climate change as though it was something that happened in a far off distant future, something that our children or our grandchildren or our great-grandchildren would have to grapple with. The reality is we are grappling with it right now, and it is absolutely having a very serious impact in many communities. The drought, the wildfire, the realities of smoke, oftentimes smoke coming into our communities from fires that aren't even based in British Columbia. There's the reality of extreme heat and extreme cold temperatures. There's also the ever-present reality of seismic risk here in British Columbia as well. That being said, I don't want British Columbians to think that they have to live in fear. This is not about making people scared. This is about encouraging people to be prepared. And for event organizers, that does also include having an emergency management plan and a strategy in place if there are natural disasters in the areas that they're hosting events.
Next question is from Alisa Thibault from Global. Please go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. My question was answered. Thank you.
Our next question is from Alisa. Please go ahead. Okay, we are moving to Wolf Deppner from Black Press.
Thank you for taking my question. If you can hear me, a question. What, if any, global figure is available that would sort of give the public a sense of how much the wildfire season is going to cost? I know in the past we've had some figures. The figures obviously change depending on needs, but what is government's current budget to deal with all these various crises as they're unfolding? For this year, I realize that it's a 3-year plan, but for this year alone.
Okay. The audio was a little bit garbled on our end, but I believe the question was about forecasting for a budget forecast for this year. Minister Ralston does have something to offer. However, I will say that the Wildfire Act and the Emergency and Disaster Management Act both provide Minister Ralston and myself and our ministry statutory appropriation powers that allow for us to spend whatever it takes to respond to emergencies, including wildfires and other hazards as well, regardless of whether it is budgeted within our fiscal plan or not. Minister Ralston?
Minister Ma has given the key answer that we have the authority to spend whatever it takes to extinguish and put out fires across the province, no matter where they are and no matter how long the season is. But just looking at last season, the numbers are still coming in because we haven't come quite to the end of the fiscal year, which is in a couple of weeks. But approximately $1 billion was spent last year. That's direct cost by BC Wildfire Service. Of course, there are other costs, the cost of buildings that were destroyed. I think the Insurance Bureau estimated $700 million in losses. And then there are all the indirect costs, business losses, and just the psychic price that people pay for being in an emergency, the pain and the suffering that they experience as a result of that. So these are very difficult and tough events. I think we all realize that. But on the financial side, people can be assured that we've done everything we can to plan for this coming season, and the funds are there to support the BC Wildfire Service, the firefighters, the communities, whether remote or closer in, that to have the resources to make their community safe and put those fires out.
Yes, I do have a follow-up question. It concerns tourism. This might be better with the cabinet colleague, Minister Copeland, but what, if any, discussions have your respective ministries had with tourism operators in BC in light of the wildfire season?
Yeah, I want to start by acknowledging how incredibly impactful the 2023 wildfire season was on tourism, on the tourism sector in BC, particularly in the central Okanagan. Many of these businesses continue to struggle to recover from the impacts of that wildfire season, the realities of the consequences of a provincial state of emergency and travel orders. We recognize that that many lives and livelihoods were impacted, in particular, lives and livelihoods that depended on the tourism sector. So the Premier's expert task force on emergencies did an enormous amount of engagement through the last several months, and that includes engagements with the tourism sector. And that those engagements have informed the types of recommendations that they are actively putting forward. Some of those recommendations we've already taken action on and have announced. Others are underway. We hope to be able to have more to say about that as time goes on.
Our next question is from Rob Shaw, Czech News. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I think this might be for Minister Ralston. Last year, we saw water restrictions put in place during the drought, and it hit local agriculture operations and farms quite hard. They complained they couldn't grow hay, that later meant they couldn't feed their crops, which later had a ripple, or feed their animals, which later had a ripple effect. I know the Premier announced new financial aid today, but my question is, are there any changes to where agriculture fits in water priority if we end up in a drought situation and water restrictions this year?
I'll begin by, by hearkening back to when I referred to drought as a sleeping giant of a natural disaster here in BC. And unfortunately, it remains true. The impacts of drought are incredibly wide-reaching. It impacts industries, it impacts the agricultural sector, it impacts individual communities. It can even go as far as impacting access to potable water, not to mention the impact that drought has on our ecosystems. And this is why a concerted effort on addressing drought has been made over the last several months. I invite Minister Cullen up to speak to the important work that is coming out of his ministry.
Thanks, Minister Ma. And the reason I'm here is because we just, as of this year, made some changes to the respect to the Water Act, the Land Act, and some other important acts. And so the response around drought, to your question, Rob, a couple of pieces. One is we're investing a significant amount of money in watershed security and building up the resilience of our watersheds to be able to handle the impacts of things like flood and drought. A second piece is we're building on, in some areas, many, many years, if not decades of work at the very local level, water tables that are set up in the community between First Nations, local government, ranchers, farmers, to be able to have two things, relationships and good plans with our support in anticipating less water and water scarcity, having a plan that works at the regional level. So we're seeing that in Coxsala, we saw that in Nicola Valley, and there have been recent conversations as well, much more productive conversations, I would say, in areas that in previous years experienced that conflict. So we know the best solutions are often local with provincial and federal support. We want to encourage those conversations, and we also want to put the resources in play. As the Premier and the Minister of Agriculture announced earlier today, $83 million for the farming and ranching sector to be able to put the infrastructure, the sloughs and the water systems in place so that we can keep as much water on the land as possible, given the concerns we have about drought this year.
Rob, do you have a follow-up?
Sure, but just to sort of clarify, there's nothing different for agriculture in terms of the priority that you put on water restriction orders when they have to be made potentially in this drought year, right? Like last year, they were one of the first to be cut off. This year, it's the same priority, or has it changed at all?
Yeah, there have not been amendments to the Water Sustainability Act, the act that guides us. Water restrictions are the last resort, as you know. And the reason that we're spending money on prevention, the reason that we're assisting farmers and ranchers right now build that infrastructure is so that we don't have to get to that place of last resort in which restrictions are issued. We are guided by laws. Some of those have some federal impact, on species at risk or salmon species in particular. So we are guided very strongly by the law of the land. Of course, prevention and the investments that we make as a province with sometimes our federal and private partners are the best sources, and that conversation at the local level where we can have the hard concession-making discussions early before the drought season. Those are the best ones, and those are the communities and the watersheds that have been the most resilient and the most productive in facing scarcity at times when it comes to water.
Our next question is from Kristen Holiday Castanet. Please go ahead.
Thank you. This past weekend in the Kamloops Fire Center, we had higher than normal temperatures and saw some wildfires pop up. So I'm wondering how unusual are these fire starts at this time of the year, and how concerning is it when considering the outlook for the rest of the spring and summer here in the Kamloops region?
Maybe I'll turn that question over to Chris Chapman.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And certainly for the last couple of days and for the next 2 or 3 days, we are in very unseasonably high temperatures, and we're seeing a little bit of wind in the north, not a lot in the south. And we did see some fires over the weekend. And I think this is, so in terms of how concerned we are, I think Mr. Ma stated at the beginning of the call today, we are doing this earlier than we have ever done it before. We are providing information to ideally all of BC as very early ahead of what we would call the core wildfire season. So we always have spring fires. There hasn't been a year in my 21-year career where we haven't responded to fires in the spring. However, it's March, and obviously we're seeing almost 20-degree weather right now. So there's a bit of heightened concern right now, saying that this is only going to last for a few days, and then we'll get back into a bit more of a normal seasonal pattern. And I think through Neil's presentation, he really covered off what we would need in this province to get back to a neutral state, somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 60 millimeters of rain in a 2-week period as we come out of winter. The chance of that happening, we haven't seen that happen in the last number of years. And so it's not so much about being concerned for us, it's about being prepared. That's what we are focused on. We are focused on making sure that we have the aircraft available to us when we need them, both fixed wing air tankers and rotary wing helicopters, additional resourcing through some of the initiatives we've talked about today, and trying to continue to invest in our predictive services unit so that we have the right tools and technology to accurately forecast what might come in the next few weeks and the next few months so that we can continue to keep the people of BC apprised of the situation. So is it concerning? I think that we have outlined that this is the normal for BC. We must be ready for what fire season may bring each and every year. And when you put that on top of the drought conditions we've been discussing today, we are certainly seeing some of the variables line up that we could have a very challenging fire season. Again, I want to stress we need to be focused on the May and June rains to see if we get any break in getting rain into the ground so that we can see a bit of a change in the dryness of our fuels. But right now, we're not seeing that rain in the forecast.
Christian, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, and it's probably for Cliff as well. Thank you for that response. And how likely is it, given some of these conditions we're seeing now, how likely is it that the Kamloops Fire Center will see an early season fire ban? And what are the conditions that will need to be in place for that to be considered?
Yeah, thank you, and good question. And you heard earlier from Minister Ralston that we are implementing, in a week's time, we'll be implementing a Category 2 and Category 3 restriction in the Caribou Fire Center. We monitor daily. And again, with the nature of our work now, we've been monitoring the conditions even through the winter around prohibitions. Now, we didn't meet any of the thresholds over the winter months because we have snow on the ground and we see freezing temperatures, but we're monitoring daily to see when we meet those thresholds for the 3 categories of prohibitions in which we may put in. So Category 3 and Category 2, which is backyard burning, pile burning, and a little bit bigger if you were industry doing some block size ignitions. And then Category 1, which is obviously campfires. And we have seen in BC over the last number of years that we rarely go through a summer where we don't see at least one Category 1 prohibition get put in place. Might not be the whole province, it might just be a select geographic, but I suspect that as we see summertime approaching, that you will likely see us putting on prohibitions for all three types of fires. And you'll also see us take them off. And that's something that we're trying to be more responsive as an organization, that once we put them on, that they don't just stay on. If the conditions return back to somewhere favorable for us in BC, then you'll see those prohibitions come off. And then they might come back on again in a few weeks' time. So we're trying to be more nimble as an organization. We know people in BC love to be outdoors. We know they love to explore in the wilderness. And obviously, when we see the conditions, we do have the ability to prohibit certain fire activity. But you'll see those come off and on throughout the summer. To answer your question specifically about Kamloops, I suspect that Kamloops Fire Center would see all three prohibitions at some point in this fire season.
Our next question is from Thomas Seal, Bloomberg. Please go ahead.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, thanks. You've described moving to a year-round wildfire service and adding people. Is it fair to say that BC has moved to a permanent emergency footing? And how many people is that now encompassing in the wildfire service?
Thank you. There's always been a small core of permanent people at the headquarters in Kamloops of BC Wildfire Service. What we have done in anticipation of longer and tougher fire seasons, last year we expanded the number of people who, rather than being hired for the fire season in March or April and leaving at the end of August or September, we've added to the number of people who are full-time, permanent, year-round people. That enables a better preparation for the fire season, and in all the dimensions that we're adding to in the BC Wildfire Service. In terms of the specific numbers, I'd turn it over to Cliff to give you the detailed numbers. I don't have the specific numbers there at hand. I simply know that it has dramatically increased.
Cliff? Do you have numbers?
Yeah, thank you, Minister Ralston. I don't have the full number in front of me. What I can say is that in the last 2 years, in the last 24 months, we have increased our full-time permanent capacity by 55%. So we have essentially more than doubled the size of our full-time contingent. That's all the way down to crew supervisor level, so that we actually have staff, tactical field staff that are available 365 days a year when we're not active in response, obviously being engaged in preparedness work, risk reduction and resiliency work. And we're continuing to look at opportunities to see if we need to go even larger as an organization as we move forward, in addition to supporting some other hazards that this province may face, like spring freshet, as well as some other hazards that we've assisted with in the last number of years. So 55% increase over the last 2 years, fairly substantial for our organization.
Thank you, Cliff. And I'll also add that in addition to other hazards, in addition to the BC Wildfire Service, the creation of the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness also was government's emphasis on ensuring an increased level of capacity by the province to be able to handle emergency situations regardless of the hazard. And so the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness also has been building up its core staffing levels to provide that 7-day-a-week, 24/7, 365 days a year level of preparedness. So we have staff we do have staff active 24/7, 365 days a year to monitor situations across the province, to answer calls from communities, to deploy resources, to provide that support. And that's work that we will continue to do as time goes on.
Do you have a follow-up?
Thank you so much. Yes, actually, just how does the number of 90 holdover fires in BC compare to previous years? Is that the highest you've seen?
I think that's probably a question for Neil or Cliff.
I can take it. It's Neil here. I don't have those stats on hand, but I could certainly look that up for you and follow up another time. But I would be comfortable saying that 90 holdover fires is probably on the higher end. It may not be a record. I can't confirm that, but it's certainly a higher number of fires. And I think when you put it in a context that it's all within predominantly one fire center, the Prince George Fire Center, it's just a good reflection of the extreme conditions that were experienced there last year. And so had those 90 holdover fires been spread throughout the whole province, it would have been a little bit different, but a very concentrated number of holdovers. Now, the other thing I'll say is we've got fires that are very large in size, over 500,000 hectares in size. And so if you put that into context in terms of fire perimeter, if you were to walk around the outside of that fire, you're over 1,000 kilometers of perimeter. Be like walking, your fire crew from Edmonton to Vancouver. Just not going to happen. And so the reality of large fire seasons like last year is a lot of portions of large fires that don't pose a risk to the public do not get suppression efforts on them. And so that will also contribute to holdover fires. And so again, I know I can't answer your question specifically, but I would say we are on the higher end in terms of the number of holdover fires that are concentrated in one particular region of the province.
That's all the time we have today. This concludes the availability. Thank you everyone for joining.